Saudi Arabia struck gold by finding oil in their backyard in 1938, but the decision to go with United States was not an easy one. In fact, King Abdulaziz, a tribal king with no formal education, no modern military, and a conservative religion, stood up against three superpowers: the mighty United Kingdom, the evil Nazis, and the defiant Soviet Union. His bold decisions and sharp prediction pushed his country from one of the poorest to one of the richest nations, with very high per capita income and a wealth unmatched to no other nation on this planet. This is the story of King Abdulaziz, the man who transformed Saudi Arabia and made the Saudis rich during his lifetime. Oil exploration in the United States began in the 1850s, with the first commercial oil well being drilled in 1859 in Pennsylvania. The discovery of oil sparked a boom in the industry as people rushed to stake their claims and start drilling. Oil made people like John D. Rockefeller and many more ultra-rich. The oil industry in the United States continued to grow during the early 20th century. New discoveries were made in Texas, Oklahoma, and California, and the demand for oil increased as it became an important fuel for transportation and industry. Meanwhile, some 8,000 miles from United States, Arabia was a desert land with camels, dates, tribal culture, and constant infighting. One man was destined to turn things and wanted to unify Arabia into a single country under his family rule: Abdulaziz Al Saud, the leader of House of Saud. House of Saud has been in existence for over 300 years and have played significant role in history of Saudi Arabia. The story of modern Saudi Arabia began in 1902, when its leader Abdulaziz Al Saud began his campaign to reclaim family's ancestral land, Najd. At the time, the Arabian Peninsula was divided among various tribes and regions, each with their own rulers and leaders. Abdulaziz led his troops and fought fierce battle to capture Najd in 1902. He focused on consolidating his power in the region of Najd, building alliances with other tribes and fighting against rivals. In 1906, he captured the region of Al-Qasim, and with the approval of the British, expanded into the eastern provinces to capture Al-Hassa in 1913, followed by Shanmar in 1921. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, the king extended his control to the regions of Hijaz and Asir in 1924, which gave him control over the important Islamic pilgrimage sites of Mecca and Medina. This was a significant political and religious victory, as it helped to gain the support of the Arab and Islamic communities. By the year 1932, Abdulaziz swept most part of Arabia and proclaimed the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which means Arabia under the family rule of Saud. This was also the time when first successful oil well was drilled in Bahrain in 1932, after numerous failed attempts by the British oil companies. The discovery of oil in Bahrain was a great news for nearby Saudi Arabia, which was one of the poorest nations on earth, with even members of the royal family faced with extreme poverty. The only source of reliable income was through donations from Muslims around the world for the pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. But with the potential of oil looming on the horizon, the Saudis knew that a new source of wealth could be the answer to their problems. Seeing this, four superpowers of that time, British, United States, Soviet Union, and Nazis, wanted to set foot and have a trade relation with Saudi Arabia. It was a moment of great excitement and hope for the nation. But one man was in ultimate tension: the King Abdulaziz. He has to make a decision on who should be given the oil exploration contract to. See, during 1930s, the influence of British during the creation of Saudi Arabia has been enormous. In fact, the King Abdulaziz signed Treaty of Darin in 1915, which established the status of a British protecting the Saudis. The United Kingdom was one of the first countries to recognize Saudi Arabia in 1926 and opened an embassy in the country. With close relations like this, one would imagine that a contract to dig oil would be awarded to the British. But the Palestinian conflict created a deep scar which made the Saudis to rethink its relationship with Britain. On the other side, emerging superpowers like Soviet Union and USA also looks convincing, as they have advancement in technologies and were the top 2 oil-producing nation in the world. It may come as a surprise to some, but in the 1920s and 30s, Russia and Saudi Arabia had a warm diplomatic relationship. The Soviet Union was the first state to recognize King Abdulaziz in 1926. The Soviet Union saw the value of diplomatic presence in the region as a way to stand up to Britain. Moscow wanted to reach out to the Saudis, who controlled Mecca and Medina, as a way to connect with the entire Muslim world. The Soviet Union aimed to reach out to thousands of Muslims during the annual pilgrimage to Mecca and spark anti-colonial sentiment. The Arab world did hated colonial ideology, but they hated communism more. Saudis realized that a communist revolution would put more danger to the kingdom than gain. The most interesting of them all is the Nazis. The Saudis had a fantasy for Nazis as they both hated Jews. For Saudis, it was the Palestinian conflict which was happening right in front of them. The Nazis too showed keen interest on the Saudis. In fact, in a speech with Saudi Special Envoy, Hitler made warm references toward Muslim. "The peoples of Islam will always be closer to us than France." In fact, King Abdulaziz wanted the Germans to participate in oil exploration and expressed his willingness to grant privileges. But Hitler rejected the proposal for 2 reasons. The first was that Germany was unable to protect its interests in Saudi Arabia in the event of war. And secondly, that Germany at that time was unable to meet the financial demands put by the king as a condition for obtaining those privileges. Had the deal went smoothly, we would have seen a different Saudi Arabia. This is where the tribal king who fought for 30 years with camels and swords, with no formal education, made a bold move. He chose a country that is 8,000 miles away from them, the United States. A move considered very brilliant at that time. Of course, the deal with United States got them more money too, but taking a neutral stand helped them avoid unnecessary conflict. Standard Oil from California performs oil exploration from 1933 and found oil in 1938. It was a gold mine, identified as the largest source of petroleum in the world. This really pisses off the rest of the players, since all 3 of them are closer to Saudi Arabia and had past relationship than United States. The Nazis were furious. Hitler had told his military commanders in 1939, shortly before the beginning of World War II, "We shall continue to make disturbances in the Far East and in Arabia. Let us think as men and let us see in these peoples, at best lacquered half-apes who are anxious to experience the lash." The British was really upset on the Saudis siding with the United States, but it had other problems at that time, like threat from Nazis and huge wealth crisis caused by war. And for Russians, it took 55 years to establish diplomatic connection to the Saudis after the dissolution of Soviet Union in 1992. From the king's point of view, they played it very safe. For instance, if they went with the Nazis, there is a possibility of British and the Allies turning against them. And if they go with the British, it would have earned the wrath of the Führer. Imagine if they had sided with the British. Would the British have saved them when the Nazis posed a threat? Probably no, as they themselves were scrambling to fight back the Nazis. After the end of the war, the relationship between Saudis and US grew stronger. The core logic underpinning the relationship is that the United States provides military protection of the kingdom in exchange for a reliable oil supply from the Saudis. By this time, the king grew old and passed on most responsibilities to his children. The king had 22 wives and around 100 children, out of which 45 were sons, and in that 45, only 2 were most influential: Prince Saud, the future king, and Prince Faisal. In 1953, the king died, and at the time, Saudi Arabia was the 3rd largest producer of oil in the whole world. Today, Saudi Arabia is the 2nd largest producer of oil in the world, with a GDP of $2 trillion. A society filled with lavish palaces, racy cars, lions, tigers, and ultra-rich who have billions as pocket monies to spend. It is totally worthy to remember that the stability and wealth Saudi Arabia currently enjoys is a result of the sacrifices and hard work of King Abdulaziz. Subscribe to Big Money Makers for more such videos.